This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Christopher Quigley for the first time. Welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate this.
Well, we love talking to artists. I kind of gave you the spiel. We've been on air since 2016, over 1,200 live interviews. We like to give people a chance to have like a very authentic and kind of flow state interview. But we're going to talk today about art that doesn't flinch, reimagining spaces where violence hides. And we're going to talk about your URL, where you have an ALCHEMIA art workshop.org. And we'll get into that. But welcome to the show again. And you're a Nova Scotia based artist. You're a designer, you're a stroke survivor.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into your whole history. But thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a nice intro.
So one of the first things we always ask any guest is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, I'll say there was before the fire and after the fire. Before the fire, I was really motivated by money and success and material things. And since the stroke, I am more motivated by, instead of just doing well, doing good. And so after I was sick, and I was very sick for a long time, that I was like, I need to do something else with my life, and I want to dedicate it to creating artwork because I have a voice, and I want to make sure that I use that. Mm-hmm. And so, doing good. I just want to do some good with the second half of my life. That's what motivates me.
Well, I think it's good to pay it forward. I've talked to a lot of people who like to leverage their experience or provide, safe spaces for people to work or to present ideas that will, give people hope and also show that things can be done.
Yeah.
And I think just by raising your voice and putting your own work out there, you can inspire other artists to say, hey, I should do that too.
Yeah. And for 20 years of my career, what I did is I built and fabricated and engineered pieces for other artists. So I was building, I had a company in the United States that built large scale public art pieces, that built large architectural features. Like we finished doing all the custom lighting for South Street Seaport in Manhattan for Howard Hughes. We're doing a 28-story media facade that I'm overseeing for a company called CoStar in Richmond, Virginia. I did a large piece for an artist named Derek Porter for Georgia Tech, the library. So I've been involved doing this stuff and facilitating these pieces for so many other artists for about 20 years of my life. And I've seen what they do. And so I've been part of the process, from the concept to the narrative, to the engineering, to the fabrication, to the install. So I know how to do this. Mm-hmm. So so I learned from them to be like, oh, I know how to do this. I can do this.
So then you wanted to have your own voice, because that's what happens. Yeah. You talk to a studio musician, the same kind of setup. Like a studio musician is there making something come to life for the singer-songwriter. But a lot of times they would go and say, well, why I should actually work on my own piece. Yeah. I'm spending here building, everybody else's dream. It's like, why don't I work on my own?
That's exactly what happened with me. And this is, after, when I had the stroke, and the stroke really did rewire my brain. And when people say that, it's like, I always call it before and after the fire. And you'll hear me say that a lot, but it rewired me. I'm a much more deeply emotional man than I was previous. I feel things a lot more deeply. I am a lot more affected by the small gestures that people make, conversations, the time that I get to spend with people, because it was one of those kind of things. Like, I was a very healthy man. I was not a smoker. I was an occasional drinker. I don't do any drugs, and I still had a stroke. I had 2 of them. Wow. in front of a pie shop. So, I mean, if you ever want to talk about something being poetic, is like stroke out in front of a pie shop. But the reality behind it is that, it rewired me, and it changed who I am fundamentally. And when I came out of it, I saw the world very differently. I saw the world with a lot more emotion and a lot more empathy. And I just realized I needed to do things to be involved, to get involved, and to do something that affects some change. And so, when you spent your entire life making other people's dreams come true and you're not working on your own, when you realize your own mortality, when you realize your own mortality can be taken away and your own life can be taken away in the blink of an eye, your priorities change, and my
Yeah.
priorities changed.
I think that's a common thread. I've talked to a lot of artists, and I have my cancer survivor myself. So that was like,
Congratulations.
but it's like it's that crucible moment that I've met a lot of people. Like, what gave you the when I talk to creatives, I was like, I always ask, like, what gave you the permission structure to think that you can, like, to believe your work should be presented? Because I've run into a lot of artists in my day as musicians, right? I was like 16. Well, I was around all these musicians, like most of them aren't playing anymore
Really?
because they just didn't believe in their own art, right?
Yeah.
They had other reasons why they did it. They wanted to hit big. They wanted to do this. Like they never played their keys. They didn't play the bass. They didn't play because they loved it. They were trying to get to something else.
Sure.
They people I know that stuck with their instruments or went to other instruments or are still in it is because they actually love music.
Yeah. Well, and I got into this because, and it was a bit of a circuitous route. I just knew that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do things my way. I don't ask a lot of permission for things. I'm the way that my brain is working now is that I think I'm capable. I know that I'm remarkably capable of things because I know that I can parlay the history and the business acumen that I had for 20 plus years into this field and be like, oh, I know how to kind of like navigate my way through it, or I can learn how to navigate my way through it. Not because I was looking at an end goal of like more success or more money. It's just like, no, I know how to do this. I can do this. I can do this really effectively. And even with this first piece that we're launching, which has turned into a national project at scale, it didn't come about. It came about because somebody offered me the opportunity to develop this. It was a woman named Kellyanne Hamshaw, who is an executive director of one of the transition houses here where I live. And I went to her originally to talk about a housing plan, and that's what I went there for. And she looked at my history and said, I see what you've done. I've seen your portfolio. Would you be interested in taking on something that was more educational, but really kind of addressed men and men's involvement with gender based violence and
Mhm.
intimate partner violence? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I can take this on. And when I went away, I took about 5 weeks to 6 weeks to kind of talk to policymakers and frontline workers and academics to be like, how can I mold this into something? And then went back to her 6 weeks later with this entire plan for transformation of dangerous spaces, which we're taking on the road in 2026
Is that
through
internationally
2028.
or is that just in Canada?
Well, we've been offered a gallery in Dallas, so it is going to be international at some point, but it'll be after the 20 or the 33-month Canadian tour, and then we will bring it down to the United States and let that run its course down there. But the piece itself was just because somebody saw my capability and
Mhm.
offered me the position and offered me the role and said, "Do you want to take this on?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to take this really seriously," and went for it. But I
Well,
didn't
I
do it
think
because there was anything else. I was like, yeah, I can do this.
like art is always, at least from a songwriter standpoint, I've always felt that art is part of social change, especially if you look at like the '60s, look like Dylan, Marvin Gaye, what's going on. You can actually be part of the fabric of a social movement. You can be part of what's going on. You can actually affect it. It's both two-way communication. Or multiple way communication that you
Yeah,
can link to something, and sometimes the arts can express something through nonverbal or different aspects of art can run deeper than what meets the eye. Like you can
yeah,
have a deeper conversation with people about something and really connect.
Yeah, and this is a really visceral conversation talking about men's involvement, and because men, like in Canada, and where this project came from was that there was, I live in a very small town of about
Mhm.
1,000 people. So I was living in Manhattan. I was living in Manhattan for about 10 years. And then I'm in a, living in on West 75th and Central Park West, and now I'm living out in the middle of lake country in Nova Scotia, Canada. But there was a woman that died in our town, and her name is Elaine Mosher, and her partner had murdered her, and it affected me. I didn't know her, just so we understand. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know her family, but this project came about because I was affected by this woman's death in my town, and it was the sixth in less than 6 months. And it fell on the heels of our community and our province where I live, calling it an epidemic. And it followed on the heels of a mass casualty report that brought out the statement of that men need to be involved and men need to step up and take responsibility and start taking a role in helping correct this issue that women have. And I kind of took this very seriously, and I had to take it very seriously. And when I was creating this, it had to be immersive. It had to be something like music. It had to be musical. It had to have sound. It had to have texture. It had to have touch. And it had to be something that was also interactive, the way music is interactive, the way that people interact with music. So I took a very musical way and poetic way of developing this. And these are 8 bathroom stalls
Mhm.
that are in a blacked out room with a single point of light over top of them, and then each one of the 8, and it usually in the standard time for a woman to leave her abusive partner is 7 to 8 times. So I chose the 8 stalls very specifically, and each one focuses on a theme of gender based violence, but from the man's perspective about where we learn it and how
Mhm.
we learn it. And I look back at my own experience of like, where did I learn the things? And I was like, I learned them in the locker room. I learned them in where I got beat up was in the boys' bathroom, where I got,
Interesting.
yeah, where I got beat up in the boys' locker room, where I heard the jokes and I laughed at the things I shouldn't have laughed at. And I learned the vernacular. And so this piece has got a tremendous amount of technology added to it, because it's also meant to talk about the transmutation of this analog source that we once learned everything in the boys' bathroom and in the locker room, to where it's now online and it's
Yeah.
dangerous. And these people that have platforms and tens of millions of followers
Yeah, we
are
got a
now being
problem with
monetizing.
yeah, well, the manosphere, or
Oh,
the brosphere
yeah, the brosphere.
has given, like, this permission to, like, the base kind of emotions are celebrated, like, if like, the problem I have with, like, this men's movement is it is masking, you know, you know, vulnerability and emotional intelligence. You just throw that out, and anger is how you're a man. Like, and violence is how you're a man, and weakness is to show any kind of feeling or any kind of connectedness or empathy. That's weak. You're a loser. You're weak.
It's
Yeah,
very true.
and the kind of manosphere just elevates people who kind of want to go back to, like, what, the 1700s. They have this mindset where they think that's the way that to advance as a man is to go back to 1700.
Well, and it's this idea, and it's being done at a scale like when you and I grew up, it was 15 guys at a time, and now we're dealing with hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of young men and boys that are being fed this information. And where I look at this, and I don't, and I'm going to point fingers, because we actually have to start calling it out for what it is. It's
Yeah, yeah.
hate. It's hate, and it's radicalization. And these young men are being radicalized in a way that it's going to be very difficult for us to fix until we point it out. And we have to point our fingers at a lot of the platforms to say, you're basically complicit. You're monetizing these guys. You're monetizing these men. You're monetizing, and you're giving a platform to these people and a fan base. And when these boys are, and it's still behind closed doors, because even when you call them out for dinner, they may turn the computer off and they head back out. They already have been taught who to hate. And it's being really directed at women and girls. And it's becoming more and more, it's becoming more solitary and becoming louder and becoming far, far more dangerous. But we have to point a finger at it, because until we point a finger at it and go, this is the problem, it's not going to be able to be fixed. And so
Yeah,
women have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I'm a tech person. My day job, I'm a
Right.
software designer, and what I don't like about the algorithms that are in our social media world, they're built to monetize like bad behavior,
Yeah.
like the behavior that's the most edgy, that's the most kind of degrading, the most demeaning, gets monetized and pushed to the top, while other things that are more sensitive or vulnerable are like shadow banned
Yeah.
or suppressed. So like we never really got to be able to talk about the public square of the ether and what it should look like. We
Yeah.
let these people go and build it the way they wanted to for their own kind of selfish reasons, and there's no gates. There are no, and you expect people to do things the right way. Well, they're not going to do it unless you kind of tell them what the right what the rules are.
Yeah, and I love that term that you just used as a public square, because I hadn't really, the way that I'm looking at this is that, in that this piece is meant to be within a, it's going to be within a controlled gallery space. We we and I the feedback that I had from a couple of a couple of frontline workers were like, when they read through, and like the entire project is about 28 pages of each. So it's about, for 28 pages describing the 8 stalls at detail, including some of the content that would be added into it. And the reaction was so visceral from some people that they were so upset, and so upset by just reading what they had in front of them, because I was looking for input, because I had to get input from various sources all across Canada and the US to be like, what do you think of this? Is this going to be something that would work? And they're like, have you thought about including any trauma informed practices? And I said I had, because in my mind I was like, no, we just got to push boys into the deep end of the pool. And the resounding comment was like, no, we really do need to, there needs to be a guiding hand. And
Mhm.
so this piece, when it goes to gallery across the country, we actually have to have trauma therapists on hand at the beginning and at the end, because one of the main points about this is about consent. And we need to
Mhm.
ensure that all of the people that enter into this piece are completely aware that they are consenting to being a part of this. And
Oh,
that we have to walk them through and go, like, this is going to be very triggering. There are going to be things that are going to be in here that are going to be upsetting, because they are upsetting. They are upsetting things. They're meant to be. They're meant to confront, and they're meant to be confrontational. And at the end of it, after a group goes through, they sit down and there's a debrief with the trauma therapist afterwards to go, how did that make you feel? What do you have to add to this? Because it's like, it's an interactive. You're immersed in this, and you're forced to sit in the mess. And so I look at this as my public square.
well, it's a
I
public, it's like a happening, or it's like when you create like a multimedia art event that you want that interactive experience. And if you're thoughtful enough to know, I was a sociology major, that
Oh,
you
good.
need to kind of have a way to deal with the triggers and the pain
Yeah.
and the enemy. And the problem is, you got some people, they're just like feeding off the tree. They're they're putting like accelerant on the fire.
Yeah.
And if you and they make money by doing that, or they get power by doing
Yes.
that. And so
Yeah.
if you have to start to kind of debrief people and get, like, yeah, you can pull somebody out of a cult, but they have to be debriefed, right? You have to go through a process. It's
Yeah.
not like zero from 100 back to zero.
Yeah. I
You
don't
have
get
to,
to drop people off a cliff.
yeah, that's not the way to do it.
This is not the way to do it. So we've been very, very cautious, and very, very, very tender in the way that we are, like how we even get young men and boys to be immersed in this, because it is going to be something that's going to be a bit controversial and a bit confrontational. So we've been working with men's organizations across Canada, and I'm reaching out to men's organizations in the US with a tremendous amount of success. You know, women's organizations have signed on and have given incredible endorsements for this project, which is helping us do our fundraising. And our fundraising starts on August 1st of this year. Mm-hmm. And the endorsements that we've been getting and from men's organizations have been a little bit slower, because this is a little bit of a different piece for them, because it's a bit of a different work that's outside of there, because it's not part of a movement. It's not it's just, it's artwork. But the men's organizations have now started to step up to go, we would like to be involved in the education portion. How can we assist? It's been like, I'm really surprised that this has kind of taken on the life that it has, and what it's going to be and where it's going to be at the end of all of this is just really encouraging. And I'm really happy for it. I'm sad how it had to start. It started from grief, but it's really turned into something that that just has taken on a life of its own, and I'm really proud of it.
Well, I think it's really important to start to reach out, you know, because we have such a polarized society, at least in the States. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but like people are so triggered and they're so caught up in their lane. And like I gotta stay in this lane. You can't cross over. Being an artist, I cross lanes all day.
Yeah.
Like the part of like being an experimental musician is I want to merge things. I want to like challenge the preconceived notions of the canon, right? So if there's a certain set of canon rules to any kind of musical theory, you learn it, but then you break it.
Yeah.
and in order to deal with society, people are stuck in their social mores. They're stuck in their belief systems. They're stuck in what they feel makes them feel safe.
And people like you don't ask permission to do that. You just do it. You don't ask for permission. It's like, hey, can I experiment with this music? You just say no, because there is no arbiter of music. There is not one person that is like the be all end all that says you get to this is the music that you now get to produce, and this is what you get to play. And this is now your lane. There is no arbiter of this. And so even when I created this, there is no arbiter that stands at the doorway to say, you can't create this. I don't ask for permission. I don't need to ask for permission. I just do what I'm going to do. And if people like it, great. But if it's not great, people aren't going to like it. Nothing will happen with it. But with something kind of like this,
approach, like if you have an approach to like a contemporary artist or an artist that's trying to get in the galleries, that's conventional. Like if you're doing pastels, you're doing, certain types of known canon forms, there's a certain structure to that. But if you're in the cutting edge, like the blurring of things, and you're doing like installments, you're doing things that are more innovative, crossing genre, multimedia type of events, there's certain people that will, have an affinity for that.
Yeah.
But like you said, as an artist, a lot of times we believe in, this the idea that we throw something into the world that's going to have a law of attraction, and the people that need to see it will find it. They'll vibrate on the right frequency, and they'll just go toward it.
Yeah.
Rather than being scared. I know a lot of artists, like they got a lot of stuff sitting in their loft, and they won't put it out because they don't know if they have the permission to put it out. But you have to get to that point where you say, well, I don't care what the haters will say. I don't care what the gatekeepers will say. I'm going to go do like what Hendrix did with feedback. Feedback was not allowed, right? Like recording engineers would edit it out. He stuck to his guns and said, do not edit it out. It needs to be in there. And they're like, well, that's not the right thing. Well, it doesn't matter. That's what it's going to be, right? You have to be that person that pushes it.
Yeah, there's always got to be people that push the boundaries within the public sphere, and just not asking permission. You don't need to ask anybody permission to do anything creative. If you have it in you, do it. But make sure it's good. People can create anything you want. Like, a lot of people spend a lot of time cultivating their look. They cultivate this idea of what they're supposed to look like. And they forget that just because you create and you cultivate this incredible look, or you curate this incredible look for yourself, that doesn't mean that you're going to be a really great artist or you're going to be a really great musician. It just means that you're really good at styling yourself to look a certain way. But if you take that time, the same amount of energy that you put into this thing that is fleeting, it's far more ephemeral than any other piece of artwork you'll ever create. And ephemeral is as much as anybody wants it to be. Like a song can last a year, or it can last 50 years, or it can last 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
Artwork is the same way. It can last 20,000 years, or it can last a couple of months. So there's this ephemeral nature. But if you put the same amount of effort that you're putting into this very fleeting ephemeral thing into your artwork, it'll last longer. Because there's more soul in it. There's more put into it. You're putting more of yourself into it rather than a look.
Yeah, well, it's the depth of what you're trying to get to what, to me is like, do you do the art because you're passionate about art, or are you passionate about the metrics of whether or not you're going to get X amount of
Yeah,
money, X amount of views, X amount of attention? You think about a guy like William Blake, Victorian poet. He etched the songs of innocence and experience in metal plates, and they were found in a barn. He was not known in the Victorian era as one of the greatest Victorian poets until he wasn't here. But he etched those plates with all his passion, and those they were considered one of the greatest, Victorian poets of all time. But he did it because he loved it, not because he was trying to stay in step with the greatest poets of
yeah,
his era. Nobody even knew who he was.
yeah,
But he had the belief that his art should be permanent, so he put it into plates. He just didn't know how to market.
yeah. And that's like a perfect example of how ephemeral, how something that can actually stand the test of time. And he created something that was meant to stand. He didn't do it. He didn't do it for that purpose. He just did it. That was it.
Yeah.
So any of us that are creating and even anybody out there that's creating anything, go into it with the idea of create something good, create something that's going to do some good, that will change people, that will affect some change. And even with something like what with this initiative that we created, we created a nonprofit organization to produce it. And it was kind of like it was a total cart before the horse idea of I created the artwork, and then it was like, well, how do I get this out into the world? And like, now I need to create a nonprofit organization that this can now be produced by. And going after civic, and going after politicians and mayors and town councils all across the country, has kind of shown me that this is kind of needed now. That what was asked of me was, as a man, and I'm only one man, but I stood up and went, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do something, because intimate partner violence is not a women's issue. They've borne they bear the brunt of this for decades, and this is like, it's time for men to step up and to say, hey, you know what, I got to be involved in this because I need to fix it, and not be silent. And that's what we were taught. I mean, we were all taught to be silent, to be quiet, to don't say
Yeah, I
anything.
mean, people are scared of the shame of it.
Yeah,
The police departments didn't actually, look into it with any depth. They kind of weren't trained to. As in sociology, social work, I worked in some domestic violence clinics in Maine when I was going to school, and it was always, like you had to spend a lot of time working with the cops to make them understand what they're dealing with, right?
yeah,
They would have to get trained by psychologists and sociologists to make them understand the weight of what their duty was, right? When we're interviewing situations where it's like you have to learn the right words,
yes,
you have to learn the right kind of approach, because you can just like shut somebody down and you're not going to get any of the results that you need to get because of your attitude. But if
Yeah.
you're not understanding the situation or trying to minimizing the situation, so it's like there's a lot of responsibility on the society, at the macrocosm and in a microcosm. Like the microcosm of each individual man to understand it's not being a man to be a violent man,
No.
right? And then the macrocosm of having a social structure that doesn't encourage that legally, socially, through the religious means or whatever. You got to make sure this is at the macrocosm that you don't have gates that are allowing it and suppressing the real evidence of it just because it's shameful and you don't want to show that.
Yeah.
But you just throw it under the rug and just metastasizes into a cancer.
Yeah. And in our country, and I know that the statistics are pretty stubborn in both Canada and the United States, but in my country, in Canada, just to give you a rough idea, there was in 2024 there was over 160,000 reported incidents of intimate partner violence. That works out to about over 300 a day, or one every 4 minutes. And then we add on, the amount of deaths that are part of this. It is a sobering, remarkably sobering fact that this is still a thing that's happening now. And with the amount of information and the rhetoric and the misogyny that's being presented to young men now,
Yeah.
it's only going to get worse. But we guys like you and me have to kind of go like, no, we have to start being point guard, man.
Because the problem is like we have a society that likes to otherize, right? So we spend a lot of time and money otherizing like this potential threat. When if you look at what the numbers you just said, that threat is actually the person you know. It's your partner, it's your husband, it's somebody that's close to you. Most likely, if you're gonna get hurt
Yeah.
in any kind of situation, it's the person closest to you, not the stranger, not the other. That you got the random serial killer, which gets elevated, right? But the thing that's more potential to actually happen to you is the person that you know is the one that's going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And the society is kind of built, the politics and everything is built on that this other is more of a threat.
Well, and the statistics are like, even in our when I approach it, it's like the statistics prove that almost every one of us, almost everybody has had it affect them in some way. I don't know any of the women in my life that I love right now. Let's like talk about my mother, my sister, my grandmother, my neighbor, my friends. I don't know anybody that hasn't been affected by either intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. Even I had the shit kicked out of me in school many times. And for various reasons. And the women that I know in my life have all been affected by it in some form or factor. And that's every one of them. That's not one person that I don't know. And it's also something that was in my family. I remember the very earliest, I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. And I remember a fight that my father had with my mother. And I remember it very clearly. I remember, glass being shattered. I remember a dustpan being thrown at her head. And I remember him throwing milk in her face. And I remember that very clearly. And I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. But that stuff stuck with me. It stuck with me. My family has had, our issues with police involvement because of intimate partner violence. So this entire project for me is based on lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a metaphorical piece. This is a historical piece.
Yeah.
This is my history that I put into this about what I learned and what I experienced and what women that I know have experienced. And that's the real truth behind this, is that it is meant to be a mirror, to be like, hey guys,
a
like,
looking glass.
it's a looking glass, man. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. That's a good comment.
Well, that's the whole examination of the Victorians is like the looking glass self is like a core to the idea is that you need to do some self-examination.
Yeah.
And the problem we have is we got systems that, we got people who like we were talking about the kind of bros and this
The
kind of
brosphere.
manosphere is like it's always the blame game. It's always the other that limits like your potential is not because you didn't actually, you know, have any kind of expectations of self-improvement. Your whole trajectory is based on your boss did this, your friend did that, this person down the street did this, your wife isn't respecting you, your girlfriend doesn't respect you. So then the way to lash out is like you're watching a James Cagney movie and he's putting a grapefruit in somebody's face. You know,
Yeah.
we have a lot of examples in film and TV and a lot of media before the internet that showed that level of violence. You could go into comic books, like you go like EC Comics
Hmm.
or old crime comics from the 40s and 50s had covers of very violent acts toward women all over those comic books. Right, it created the Code Authority, which kind of came later. But the it's like you have like comic books that are showing violence toward women throughout the 40s and the 50s up to the early 60s. And so like you're wondering like why the things mirror that, if you're getting the content of the day, the comic book versus the internet today
Yeah.
in the blogosphere, it's the same impact,
It
right? You're
is.
still given a permission structure to say that's how you be a man. That's how you're tough. That's how you show that you're on top. That's got to stop. You've got to look at your vulnerability and actually feeling emotions and not turning them into anger. Actually being okay with the feeling. It's like men are not taught how to be okay with their feelings.
No,
I think
that's a
that's a
really
core problem.
insightful. That's a really insightful comment. I just want to write that down. That was very good.
Being a writer, I mean, that's the whole point is they not being perfect, right? Like I'm a musician, but I'm still a writer.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is evoke emotions and have an emotional impact. And that is being willing to make mistakes, being willing to be vulnerable, and be willing to kind of, tell the hard story.
Yeah.
And that some people can't tell the hard story because it's unsafe for them. They can't get out of a bad loop.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The I think what I think that what young men and what boys are being exposed to now is and again, when we were and it's the same thing. But the digital format, just how they're able to hit a scale, like just they're at scale. They're at a scale that we just I
Yeah,
don't think
it's
we really
bigger
can
than the comics
comprehend.
and bigger than the film. It's actually
We're yeah we I don't think that we can really comprehend, or I don't at least I can comprehend it, but it's at a scale that is so astronomical that we look at it, and I'm seeing these guys starting to get taken down. I'm seeing them starting to lose their position and being brought down a little bit more. There was just an article out recently that was addressing Andrew Tate
yeah, Tate,
and
yeah,
the
Tate
and the
brothers, yeah,
and the tens of millions of young men that he inspires, and the type of language that he uses, and the vernacular, and the this type of socialization is I mean, it's just as insidious as what you and I dealt with comic books and movies. And I remember seeing them, and the objectification of women within comic books was rampant, and it was how we were socialized. Our socialization is what brought us to where we are.
hmm
And the socialization that men are dealing with now, that young men are dealing with now, is I look at it and I see it, and the way that I'm interpreting it and the way that I'm bringing it on is that it is far more violent.
yeah,
The rhetoric is far more dangerous, and the hate. It's not even like an admiration of women. It is hate. They
yeah.
are
It's a
being
total
taught how to.
hatred.
It's
Yeah,
hatred.
yeah. It's not. It's just like when you look at it like a racist, like you say in America, as an African American, you look at like the KKK, you look at neo
Sure.
Nazis, you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they're tracking all these crazy nationalists, right? And it's the same kind of hate. It's just directed at the other gender, right?
Yeah.
But it's like they just have this permission structure, and for some reason, the problem with the algorithms is they find like-minded people when they keep on just exponentially building these groups of and pulling in people, and then their feed just keeps on giving you the same thing. You keep on getting fed the same bad sugar,
Yeah.
right? And you're on that sugar hate high. It just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse, and this builds up, and then there's no gate. There's no comic code authority. There's no film rated R authority. There's like it's just blasting through, and then you're getting it on demand on your little device, and it's like you're 2 o'clock in the morning looking at it. You're 9 o'clock in the morning looking at it. You're 12 o'clock at night. Like you just not stop. You're just nonstop looking at it, and that I think is the critical issue.
This is the what you just mentioned and what you just regaled. That is radicalization. That is a form of radicalization. It's done in religion. It's done in other formats. It is done with gurus. It is done across the board. These people, these people that have these platforms, that have this access to these young men, they're radicalizing these people. That's what this is. That's what we have to call it.
Yeah,
It's radicalization of young men against women.
yeah, it's not good for overall society, for the macrocosm, because
No.
like if you don't pull together as women and men and everybody, all genders, like because I come from like Native American perspective, it's like there's multiple genders people want to get into that, whatever they want to do, but there's a lot that you should be expanding, and we're in a contraction. We're in people saying there's only the X and Y. There's only black and white. There's only this. There's only right and wrong, and I say what's right, and you know what's wrong. and that's the kind of like world we're living in. It's very feudal. It's very top down. It's like full of like just it's just over. It's not a double speak from an Orwellian point of view. It's like reading 1984 in Animal Farm, and it's like wow, we're actually there.
Yeah, and when just to kind of touch on your point of the one of the questions that I've had asked me in other interviews is that the idea of gender, and one of the things that I wanted to kind of make a point of is that this doesn't explicitly talk about any other gender other than men, because regardless if you're trans or you're any other gender that you want to be, at one point, regardless of whatever you are, at one point you were socialized as a boy. Yeah. And as a man. That socialization was already in you, and you can't deny it. You can't erase it. Even if you were on the receiving end, if you're a young man and you are receiving this negative stuff, you are still socialized. This is the socialization of it. So the common thread through all of it, whether or not you are gender, non-binary, you're a trans woman now, at one point in your life, you were socialized as a boy, as a man. You were taught the things that were brought down from your uncles, your fathers, your grandfathers, your cousins, your teammates on sports. Even if you didn't play sports, all of that information was still being downloaded into you. So it doesn't matter. So this is like the only gender that this is meant to look at is the one that perpetrates the violence against women. So this entire
big daddy culture, you got the big daddy coming down saying that that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right. So, and like, this isn't meant to have all the answers, and it's, I don't profess to have all the answers with this, but when we take this on the road, and we are very excited about it. We've been given an opportunity with the National Gallery to present to them, and they accepted our proposal, and it'll be part of the National Gallery external exhibits, which is a really great boon for us, which will get us into other galleries across Canada and the United States. But this is just really meant to hold that looking glass up to both men and young men, and be like, take a look, like, you're part of this. You have to kind of understand that you're being told a lie.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for the whole world to see it. Maybe we could bring it to the EU Do you bring it
Ah,
to the east? I don't know if you're willing to go that far, but
from your mouth to God's ears.
but I think it's a mission that needs to be taken on because we're living in an age where it's hearts and minds, and it's more a lot of mind. There's a lot of manipulation of people's young minds going
Yeah,
on in the social square, and like the printing press, is kind of back in the day. I love to read physical stuff, but we're living in this electronic age, and people have got to get a hold of it and kind of understand
yeah,
that art like what you're doing, like art that actually affects the spaces in a public life that intersects with like politics, intersects with social issues. It's always been to me a place to people need to be taught, and we're being kind of shown in the US where like, oh, that has no value. It's all STEM. Everything has to be STEM. And I mean, I come from an engineering kind of background, and I understand that, but losing this kind of point of view is putting your hand behind your back, like making you not a full person. I think the men who don't embrace that looking glass self we've been talking about, or that self examination, even though it's hard, I think it's a hard thing to get. And I'm glad you kind of kind of step people down when they run into it. But I think this is a really important thing, and I'm glad that you were on the show. And we
thank
do have
you.
your ALCHEMIA art workshop.org. So
Oh,
if
thank
people
you.
click on that, that's gonna be fully clickable. I see you have a case for support, like PDF there.
Yeah,
But is
that's the
that
case for support, and we have a whole website that talks about the entire project as a whole. My board of directors, because this is a nonprofit, I have a board of directors which is really active, from executive directors of others to ex RCMP, ex police officers, town councilor, ex somebody that was in fintech for many years. So we've got a really
that's good?
strong board, and so our project, and we really encourage men to get involved in any way that you want. We start fundraising on August 1st. If you want to donate to us, we would be appreciative. But we are well on our way to having this thing out on the road, and it's going to be I'm really excited for it. I'm really excited to see how it's going to be received by the public.
Hopefully you can bring it to New York or the Northeast, because that's where I'm in the Northeast of the
Oh,
US too.
it's it'll be that'll be on the plan. But I would love to see this go around North America. That's like, as we talk about goals, it's like I would love to see that happen. To see it. I want as many bums and seats as I can possibly get.
Yeah,
I
I think
mean,
it's real important. But I'm glad
yeah,
you're
it
on the show.
is.
This is why we do the show. We like to bring these type of uh, this kind of information from artists around the world and give it to our audience, so that people see what's going on in the art world isn't just the big motion picture comic book superheroes. Like there's a depth of art out here that people need to embrace, and
Yeah.
sometimes it has to do with social issues. And I'm glad that you brought that to us today, and want to
Thank
thank
you.
you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.